Welcome, one and all attendees. This is, I believe, the last full panel for LD4 25, although don't forget that we will have a closing plenary coming up after this. I think it'll be about 15 minutes. Participants are currently filing in. So I am going to introduce our speakers. You should Harley asks, can I be given the capability to unmute and share my screen? I'll look into it, Carly. So feel free to post questions in the chat. I think we're going to have I see. So you are a panelist. Let me grab you in that case. I'm promoting you to panelist, and my apologies for that. Great. Well, this is a surprise for me. Apologies for this. I think Carly is going to be doing the introduction to this panel.
Oh, I'm just going to introduce the LD4 Art and Design Affinity group, and then I can hand it back to you, Mark, to introduce
Okay,
our
perfect.
speakers.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I just wanted to say at the top, I was actually going to share our website, that this session, one of the affinity group sessions. So I just wanted to just very briefly share what the LD4 Art and Design Affinity Group is and how you can connect with us. So our group aims to advance the use of linked data for art and design from a library and archives-led perspective through information sharing, exchange, and collaboration. We meet semi-monthly to learn about and discuss linked data efforts to represent various topics, including exhibitions, artist books, provenance, art collections, and so on, just to name a few. And there's actually a session right before this one about the potential of expanding our group's remit to also include performing arts or a new spin-off performing arts group. So I am pasting some links in the chat where you can learn more about our affinity group. You can also sign into today's session. So in addition to the sketch, where you registered for the conference, we also have a running notes document. And if you want to be added to the LD4 Art and Design Affinity Group's Google group, you can add your email address there or request to join the Google group. But yeah, with that, I'll hand off to Mark. I'm so excited about today's session. Our affinity group reached out to Alyssa and George after an announcement that Alyssa made to the LD4 Slack, and we're just really excited to platform this work. Thank you.
Thank you, Carly. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and get to our speakers as quickly as possible. So the title of the presentation is Connecting Linked Data Concepts to Practice Using Open Source Systems, Ogee Arches, and Linked Art. You're going to, just a quick introduction, Jessica Hayden is going to be co-moderating, so you may see her in chat. Jessica, I will make sure to enable that. So without further ado, Alyssa Loira is one of our speakers. She is a product manager at Getty Digital within the collections, platforms, and data departments. She primarily works with library and archival systems of record, as well as data modeling in Arches. And George Brusaker is our second speaker. He is with Takin.solutions. He is a semantic architect and CEO of the company. He works on things like semantic data management and ontologies. With that, I'm going to get out of the way and turn the stage over to our illustrious speakers. Thank you.
Thanks, Mark. Thanks, Carly. I'm going to share my screen. You'll see a little bit of my browser stuff on the left-hand side, just so we can navigate into our instance that we want to look at a little bit later. But hopefully this looks okay to folks. Let's give it a go. Okay. Everyone can hopefully see. All right, not hearing anything against it, so we'll go ahead and get started. Cool. So yeah, hi, thank you for joining us today in this Art and Design Affinity session. George and I are excited to be creating some context around and then doing a little bit of deep diving into a project that we worked together called Ogee. So I thought we could start with a little bit about how George's company and himself and I came to work together at the Getty. So as Mark mentioned, I'm a product manager at Getty Digital. Getty Digital is a part of the greater John Paul Getty Trust organization. And much of the work I do involves translating data models to suit our Arches instances, which we'll dig into a bit later. And George is the CEO and semantic architect for Takin.solutions, with whom Getty has brought in to work on a number of projects related to database management, semantic data modeling and mapping, and cultural heritage documentation. When I joined the Getty a few years back, I jumped onto a project that George was already knee-deep in, and that project was called the Getty Provenance Index Remodel. So this project had been going on for a long time, and the goal was to move some large databases out of a flat file system called STAR and into a linked open data environment. At its roots, the provenance index consists of millions of resources from dealer stock books, sales catalogs, archival inventories, and a lot of just revealing information on the ownership and the market histories of artworks. So Getty, Takin.solutions, and a group called Farallon worked together to transition the databases into an LOD structure, linked open data structure, and platform to support enhanced access and querying. George and his group really gave the project the structural tools it needed to work, guiding and implementing the modeling, the data mapping, the ETL processes, and the documentation work. And some struggles along the way in that really large legacy data migration project included just the sheer effort and understanding it takes to go from flat file systems into graph and semantic data systems, creating meaning around why and what amongst our peers, making sure that understanding is communicated in a consistent and common way across all the domains that exist at Getty and outside of Getty, and to align with the standards we were already working with and found to be most applicable, like linked art and CIDOC CRM. So from all this effort and education work, you've involved in this one big project came Ogee. First off, why did we call it that? It refers to a type of arch noted in the architectural domain, essentially where two arches curve and come together at an apex. And because we used a software tool called Arches to implement the whole product, George had the keen idea of naming the adaptation of this Arches package Ogee. And because I personally was new to linked open data in general, let alone the specifics of how art and design projects are placed in the linked open data domain, George worked with me and taught me all about it in order to better prime me for the larger provenance project. And from that, we devised a way to place that learning into practice. That is what became Ogee, a mashup of the Arches platform, linked art data models, semantic reference data modeling, documentation. And because building all this out on its own instance seemed to be an organized and hands-on way to kickstart an LOD project, we thought sharing it with the greater community could prove fruitful. And so ultimately, the hope is that the modes of use behind this project are to learn linked art semantic patterns, to start creating linked art compatible data using Arches without learning anything about it in terms of installation or in terms of like how it works necessarily. Also having a starting point for creating your own models and patterns based off linked art and creating new patterns for research documentation. And so this is the learning path we would like to take today, and are hoping that if you have questions after we go through some of these sections, you'll surface them throughout or at the end. We'd love to create a conversation around how this applies to you and your work. And towards the end, we'll run through a little demo to show a bit of the actual Arches instance where this Ogee project lives, essentially. And before we get started, we can see if this works. I'm not too sure. I know there's a lot of people here, but George and I are really curious about what sort of domains and expertise are covered in this affinity group. And we thought maybe if you just in the chat want to enter, like, are you an archivist? Are you a digital humanist? Are you someone who's just into linked data? Feel free to enter that into the chat and we'll just see what comes in. Oh, Alexis says she's an archivist. I know Alexis. Nice. Metadata librarian. Great. I imagine there's a lot of folks who are, yeah, metadata heavy oriented, maybe cataloging. Okay, awesome. Nice. Public library metadata specialist. Interesting. Okay. Nice. Architectural history. Great. Awesome. It's really cool to see like the diversity of backgrounds. Hopefully this stuff it kind of hits the middle of the road. It's not too expert driven and not too broad. We're trying to make sure that we capture a lot of information in this amount of time, but we'll see how it goes, and hopefully your questions get at anything that we miss. Okay. So then from there, I'm going to let George take over for our general framing of linked data ontologies and semantics.
Okay, thanks, Alyssa. So yeah, on this sort of path, we could just show you Ogee and do a workshop around that, but we thought you've all seen databases, and really the interesting thing here is trying to see why it's interesting to sort of preload an open source platform like Arches with some well thought out patterns like LinkedArt provides in order to give a really user-facing way to get into creating semantic and linked open data. So in order to sort of contextualize why we think it's a useful project and something worth looking into, we're taking a step back into looking in general what we're trying to do with linked data ontologies and semantics. And so if you'd pop over to the next slide, please, Alyssa. So basically, since we seem to be amongst good company, a sort of shared dream, I think, amongst all of us would be that we're managing sort of fair research data. That is this aim of having findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable data. So if we wanted to have that, then if we had that, then data would say what it means, be well described, and easy to integrate. Researchers could come and grab various data sets, outputs, and easily integrate them between different tools, doing different analyses without borders between data sets, without these silos. Researchers and practitioners might borrow data from different disciplines. They'd know the provenance of that data, where it came from, and could assess it critically. And we could slowly drive an ever more cohesive set of information that mutually referenced each other. However, moving on to the next slide, this is not really the world we live in. As we know, people working with data, we constantly encounter data which is extremely idiosyncratic, which has been formed in arcane and undocumented ways, which are shaped by external factors such as system design rather than the semantic content or intent of the data creator. When researchers find data sets of relevance to their work, they often have to spend days, months, or even years to try to understand and integrate those data sets and even have to redo them. A culture of data sharing isn't really deeply ingrained, and looking at sharing across disciplinary boundaries is something we still have to encourage. Data isn't connected to its provenance, and as more and more research is developed, we end up with a ever-growing problem to manage. So moving on to the next slide. Of course, there are strategies that have been suggested and which we attempt to apply in order to get a hold of this issue. And linked data and ontologies, as suggested originally by Tim Berners-Lee, a semantic web, are one of the ways that we try to get on top of this. If we could move to the next slide. And the aspect that we're really working on in making semantic linked open data is using ontologies well in order to redescribe information and have a universal logical representation of the data that we're analyzing and trying to manage and make accessible and reusable. And so the approach to building an ontology is that you study a domain of research, you provide a high-level analysis of the knowledge that is usually encoded in those domains or in that particular domain, and then from that you build this formal ontology, which is a system of classes and relations that formalize the knowledge in that domain in a way that a human can somehow read that and translate their data from their idiosyncratic TMS or MIMSI or EMU or spreadsheet or whatever into the ontology, and through that making it available online in an open format. So the dream would be that we've built these ontologies, they're understandable by humans, and a researcher even could take these things, re-express their data, and share it into this wider web and query back other people's information and start achieving that data dream we started with at the start. However, next slide, please. The reality is that this is, while we've achieved quite a bit in the fields of ontology in different domains, including cultural heritage, it's a fact that researchers have not adapted semantics in droves. This is because ontologies remain abstract and difficult to learn and are not part of a standard educational process. They are formalized, or they are presented as lingua francas, but they are not necessarily consistently applied. So arriving at that interoperable aim is also always, you get 80% of the way there, and then the rest of it eludes you. And researchers struggle to access and use the advanced tools that you would need to adopt and make use of such semantic data. Going on to the next slide. And so for people who are research data managers, there is a desire to deliver quality reusable data, but trying to bring the linked open data and semantic data dream to reality is a fight every day to both use and apply such richer data modeling strategies, to convince stakeholders that this is worth the while, to find and use robust, sustainable platforms that allow you to actually do this work, and fill in both the knowledge gap for themselves of trying to apply or to understand and apply an ontology, but also to reach out to the users of that data to give them the knowledge that they need to be able to access and reuse such data. Next slide, which I think will be the opener to the next section. So before I go on, I guess I'd like to take a pause and see if people wanted to comment or make any questions. Does that description ring true, or any other thoughts?
I did not see any comments or questions in the chat.
Then I will carry on. So that's the wider world that we're trying to work within and try to create a successful tool to help people overcome those problems. And within the scope of the work that we were doing, we're working with linked art, and linked art is based on CIDOC CRM. So I want to talk particularly about CIDOC CRM as an ontology and what it contributes and where we don't get far enough in terms of trying to realize this fair data dream. So in the big picture of CIDOC CRM, it's a core ontology for describing database schemata in the museum and historical knowledge world. It provides a general knowledge of what has happened at a human scale, a general model for information that's happened at a human scale, You can generate huge, meaningful networks of knowledge by an abstraction of things and people meeting in time. And it is a product that's been worked on for over 20 years through interdisciplinary work, and it's solid and robust, and it's used at scale. So that's positive. Could we go on to the next slide, please? And in a way, going back to that point of the model and its intelligibility, uh, it is an abstraction of museum information, and its core premise is that to integrate museum information, what you want to do is to be able to allow people to talk about the history of things through time. And so it puts events at the center of the representation of information, and that abstraction is then really easy to apply consistently in terms of talking about objects and ideas meeting in time, people being agents of activities like buying and selling things or moving things from place to place. We associate people to objects or to ideas through the event, and then the event specifies a time when something happened and the place where something happened. So that means that we can build up interesting histories of objects objects and ideas and people as they move through a space-time trajectory. And it has nice features like being able to apply names and types to everything. So it's very flexible, and at a high level, it's pretty easy to digest. However, moving on to the next slide. This is a representation of the top of the class hierarchy of this ontology. This ontology has about I can't remember now, but 80 classes, let's say. And it's actually quite a small set of classes if you think about it for describing so much information as you might describe in a museum documentation system. However, as we can see by looking at the slide itself, without having a zoom in tool, this is just a pretty graphical display with some nice colors, and it's difficult to read. And so, as you can imagine, it takes quite a lot of time to absorb and look into this ontology and really be able to apply it effectively. And we're always working against time and budgets and when we're trying to do projects like this. So that's a disadvantage. If we go to the next slide, and then the problem actually gets worse because worse and better. So CIDOC CRM is a top-level ontology for describing general information. And then a lot of work has gone on over the last 20, 30 years, integrating CIDOC CRM with more specific levels of information and specific levels of kind of documentation. So a chief example would be LRMOO, the library reference model, which is an integration of the library reference data standard with the CIDOC CRM. And that means that, again, once you apply this ontology well and consistently, you can create networks of information that do actually go over the data silos and connect across a library system and your museum database and allow you to do some interesting search across these different domains. And that there's also examples for archaeology, digital provenance, and many others. But each of those in its own right is another ontology with yet more classes and relationships to learn. And so again, that adds on to the level of the challenge of adopting and applying and then reusing this at scale, both for information managers and for their audiences. So moving on to the next slide, please. And then I know that this group has a lot of people who are working in Wikidata, so I just wanted to touch on that briefly and say that hasn't been the focus of this project at all, but I just wanted to, not ignore that in the conversation and say, the I've already pointed to some great advantages of CIDOC CRM and then the problems of absorbing it. And if you compare that to the world of Wikidata, where it's even more community, even more ground up driven, and the community can create classes and properties as and when. That means that this challenge is even potentially larger or as large when you're trying to think about how to get people to consistently use and apply an open source ontology like Wikidata as we have with CIDOC CRM. So next slide, please. So I just wanted to point out that in each of these sections, we kind of want to point out like what are strengths that are brought by these pieces of the puzzle to trying to reach the fair open data dream, and then point out some of the problems that exist so we can show how we're trying to solve them with Ogee. So in terms of what CIDOC CRM gives us, well, it gives us in a successful way a stable high-level model. There's a dedicated community that develops it and keeps it robust and logical and keeps it up to date. It is well known and adopted, so that makes it ever more valuable to use. But it has some strong challenges in terms of the complexity of understanding it, the fact that it allows you to have multiple solutions in terms of how you're going to apply it. So you don't actually necessarily arrive at a data integration. There's not a lot of support available to just reach out and get an answer to how to do something. As I pointed out, that family of models means that there's a growing diversity of classes and properties you can use, and so that creates difficulties in the integration again. And because of these multiple solutions, you constantly have to make decisions on how to apply it. So with that, I'm going to stop and see again. I don't see any comments in the or questions in the chat either. But if anybody wants to jump in and say something one way or the other, if not, then I'll pass the word to Alyssa to talk about linked art.
Yeah. So linked art is often referred to as a metadata application profile, but another way to frame it is as a usable standards-based way to describe cultural heritage. And really, it's also a community. The community consists of cultural heritage professionals who collaborate to define a method for structuring data models and also create pathways for use of those data models via APIs. So we hold in-person events, this linked art community, where often we get to debate and discuss the nuances of this particular profile. And often the group is a means of troubleshooting the application of the profile in the real world. And linked art is really something that is really, it's based on CIDOC CRM, and we'll talk a little bit more about that. But as far as the implementation standards, this image comes from one of the core linked art presentations that Rob Sanderson gives. He's a fundamental linked art creator. And this illustrates kind of a high-level reasoning for the profile and why it exists. It can be described as a way to draw some boundaries around those CIDOC CRM possibilities, as George was talking about. And you can see here that the idea is that you have your model. So the way we think about the world, abstractly, coherently as possible. The ontology being used as like a shared set of terms to encode that thinking in a logical, machine actionable way. A vocabulary, so a curated set of terms to make the ontology more concrete or to give it some pillars to rest on that are maybe like shared. And in addition to the modeling structure that's devised here, the linked art community has established the appropriate API endpoints relating back to the model and offering a pathway for the appropriate technologies to access the data that is being structured by it and by the profile, as well as lots of URIs, all kinds of complex technical pieces. And CIDOC CRM is a domain neutral ontology, as George was showing you. Lots of different domains have adopted it and really formed it to fit in the way that is most applicable. So this is sort of a way to restrict within a domain while still allowing for that art meets science flexibility of modeling things in our real world. And when we think about linked open data and the audience for it, often the data creators and the data users are highlighted as key, but maybe opposing stakeholders. In some sense, that would be something like the cataloger or the archivist that creates description on one end, and then on the other end, the researcher or the member of the public who's interpreting the data or content. But if we try to aim for usability of these models or of ontologies, we can aim for something that is not just linked open data, but linked open usable data. So in that sense, there would be a means for developers or those who are consuming data in order to serve it up in those discovery layers or to create computationally valuable links between data sets for end users. LinkedArt creates a standardized way to help that data consumer layer. It aids the structuring of real data and creates a means for both usability and sustainability. And to relate it back to the W3C priority of constituencies, which is, the W3C's guidelines for creating web pages and web experiences. This is sort of how it could map. We have the linked art profile users are sort of the developers, but there's also other constituencies to consider. And then like at the bottom here, you have that theoretical purity or that ontological boundary, which is perhaps less important than the needs for use. Like it's really aimed at making this accessible for developers so that it can be more broadly used across the web. So yeah, linked art seeks to sort of bridge that usability gap. And for those of you that aren't too familiar with the way the model looks, you can see that this looks kind of like a distillation of that CIDOC CRM model that George pointed at earlier, that's activity-based. So we're kind of looking at it from 50,000 feet, like really the broadest level. And it's intended to be activity-centric. And for example, even if we're thinking about like an art object here, the activity that starts off the reality of the existence of that object is like a production event. It was produced or made by a person in a place using a method at a certain time, and that activity led to the existence of the thing. So that's sort of the really zoomed out way to think about it. And here you kind of see it starts to gain more complexity, but that 1173 piece in there is the type of thing that it is as a human-made object, and the label for it is that it's this amphora, and it kind of explodes out into these different pieces where it's identified by an identifier, it's identified by a name. You can see that with every piece of that like distilled model, there are patterns there that get exploded out and become more complex, and those are the pieces that in the end get mapped into like the API endpoints. And there's a lot more to this, obviously, but I don't want to go too deep, but we can definitely answer more questions about it. And this is all to say that in some ways, this is like a more digestible means of like visualizing and understanding CIDOC CRM or just how to go about modeling things in the art world. But then we head into what looks like kind of just technical stuff again, right? So in order to be able to understand this and really dig in and use it, you have to be able to read JSON LD, and that, JSON LD document fatigue is a real thing. And in the result, or in the end, it's good for the developers because it's really something that they can interpret, but not necessarily reaching that end user understandability layer. So if we distill down the successes and the challenges of linked art in particular, it gathers a like-minded community to think through and commit to a CIDOC CRM-based implementation practice, which is something that we're always trying to do and get people to adopt. It speaks to developers in particular. JSON LD and API, JSON LD and the API pieces allow for a practical implementation. And on the challenging side, it doesn't speak to end users, doesn't have an end user system of implementation. And again, you need to understand JSON LD to use it in the practical world. And so then to kind of lay out the landscape a little more, we're going to talk about Arches now. So in comes an open source platform, Arches. Or at its best, a way to make some of these ontologies a little more palatable. So what is Arches? It's one of those tools that lies in a unique space in the open source ecosystem. It's both community driven in like a distributed manner, but also has some strong foundational support and a consistent stream of investment because it was conceived at the Getty Conservation Institute and has staffing aligned with its development. There's support from a lot of technical experts, both at small and medium scales. One of the gems of the tool is that it natively supports semantic data. So you can install a particular ontology alongside your instance, alongside your like website essentially, and your database. And as you build out models, that ontological constraint remains intact and keeps you from creating structures that aren't compliant with the schema that you intend to set forth with. So it's really also a whole technology stack. It has a GitHub repo, it has installation instructions, lots of README docs, and the technologies used in that stack are aimed at managing semantic data in particular. And actually, let's see. I'm sorry, I'm looking at some of these chat questions and they're great. Yeah. Oh, hi, Rob. We mentioned Rob. Okay. So some of the feature highlights of Arches, and we'll definitely go back to some of these questions that are coming up in the chat or some of these comments. But let's talk about the feature highlights for a little bit. The data management layer is pretty flexible. You can determine what's required and what's not, and it reads a little more like a GUI for a content management system, in my opinion. And then there's this reference data manager as well, where you can add local vocabularies or utilize the AAT vocabulary. And those terms can become your concept values, or really they can become like drop-down lists when you're entering data, which is nice. So you can keep people constrained to those vocabularies. The discovery layer is quite interesting. It's nice for like geo coordinates for visualizing those things. So if you're working with that kind of data, it works really well. But also visualizes semantic data in a way that seems more user-friendly without having to look at the triple necessarily or understand the triple. You're really seeing the relationships and the entities in just like a prettier way, I guess. And then the editorial interface is robust and it's being improved upon often. We'll look at some of the data entry pieces, but there's also tools for bulk data updates, like sort of find and replace processes, as well as some reporting features that are nice. Okay, so what does it look like? So I'm trying to figure out if we should noodle around or not. So we can take an initial look at what it looks like.
You have time to noodle around, Alyssa.
Do I have time? Okay,
Yeah.
cool. So instead of just showing you a static slide, we're gonna look at our Arches instance that has Ogee installed in it already. So when you do the installation on your own, this is not the package that you would get by default. So just keep that in mind. But some of those elements we talked about, hopefully you can see the Ogee homepage here. It comes with this customizable homepage, which is nice. We added these pieces in here. You don't have to necessarily, but that's part of the package. You get these like CSS and HTML files that you can work with. And then if you are, let's see, why don't we do this? If you're in what's called the manager, this is where you have all your data models that you can access and then add data to. But then if you're more of a back-end designer, you can see where those models are built out. And they look a little bit more friendly, I would say, than necessarily the JSON. We'll talk a little bit about like why this is structured this way. This is definitely coming from the Ogee package. And George's like really accurate and consistent documentation so that these terms like are consistent across the models. But you can see that this is kind of how the trees look, which looks extensive, I know, but it's part of including the entire linked art model within this package. And then there is the reference data manager that I was talking about. And those terms then, they are, when you're doing like data entry, like which looks like this, they become, I'm trying to think of one that has one. Yeah, they become like your drop downs here, essentially. So you can build out your vocabularies, and that will be the only options a person has when they're doing data entry into this database that you've built, based on the models that are in the Arches designer. So that's a like very speedy way to look at it, but hopefully it makes a little more sense when we kind of go through the demo aspect. Yeah. So, and there are these elements to it too, where when you're looking at a resource, if you hit like related resource, it'll pop up these visualizations and it'll show you how that data connects. So this is the event here is this exhibition, and it relates to this particular painting. It's a part of this set that we've made. It comes like the place that it took place at is the Louvre. So this visualization is kind of nice, we think, for teaching purposes and just to get a layer above that like JSON fatigue, a JSON view, I would say. And so some of the successes and challenges behind Arches as a platform, the intuitive means to build out semantic patterns and graphs for data model design. That's a big part of it. Installation of Arches offers a lot, but not everything. But sometimes that becomes a little too open-ended for people. But hiding semantics behind these like simple forms for easy use by end users, like definitely a big pro. Being able to use have an advanced search feature just already integrated on top of your data is nice. And then you can really, because it's that open-ended, you can also set up your own governance as far as like who has access to the designer, who has access to the configuration in general, and really set up some procedures for how your data is collected. And then, some more of the challenges are it leaves the data modeling decisions to users themselves. Sometimes when you start from scratch, like if you were to look at that instance and it didn't have any of those models in it, it's a little bit overwhelming, I would say. And then also the product, like installing the whole thing requires some expertise. There's a lot of dependencies that you have to consider. And also there is no real means of like validation of the data. So that's something that hopefully improves as people invest a little bit more into the product. Okay, do we want to go over some questions, or what do you think, George?
Yeah, I think we could pause. We're heading along with quite some speed, so I think we can
Sorry.
take some time to chat. So,
George, do you want me to present these up on a platter, or do you want to go through the chat?
maybe you manage it.
Sure.
Tell us which one's to answer.
There was kind of an exchange further up that began, I think, with a question from Benjamin Riesenberg, but that looked like it was kind of dealt with in chat. If people want to go up and take a look, they're welcome to. I will note that there was a comment, a cheeky comment from Benjamin that says, I am digging in my heels. I don't think I'll ever learn to read JSON LD with my eyes. That's what Turtle is for. Fair enough. Rob had a comment about challenges being absolutely intentional for scope. Then there is there's a question from Elias Kiriatsis. Can you feed other data models other than CIDOC CRM linked art into Arches?
I'm happy to field that. So Arches comes, like when you install Arches, it's empty. And so you can also not even install an ontology and just build graphs via anarchic principles. But if you want to have controlled normalized data, then you would install an ontology. And then because of the world we're working within, we install CIDOC CRM, and then we build models following the linked art principles for how to use CIDOC CRM. But You could also install CIDOC CRM and ignore linked art principles and do it a different way. But you don't have to install CIDOC CRM at all. You could install like BibFrame or anything that's an RDF, serialization one ontology. You should be able to install it and then build out a model with it.
I think that was the end of the questions.
Okay, great. Thank you for sharing all the links too. Really appreciate it. And yeah, I've noticed this too. So the Affinity calls, they have note taking. So that's really handy. I appreciate that from the LD4 side of things, like your own internal note taking, which is great. Cool. Should we keep going?
Yeah.
Okay.
Is that me now?
I think
Or
it's
is it
me
you?
still.
Okay, okay.
Yeah,
Okay,
maybe a couple
tell me
more for
more.
me.
Yeah.
No worries. So yeah, we're kind of gone all over these things in order to get to like where, like how Ogee Arches fits in all of that. So it's an open source Arches package implementing linked art patterns. It serves as a starting point for users to explore and apply linked art, providing an entry into the world of open semantic data. So when you install all those pieces of Arches that George is talking about, you can include a package that has not only the models in it, but also some data, some different pieces. So we've kind of packaged it in this way that can go along with certain versions of the Arches installation, and that's what's in the GitHub repo. So yeah, who is it for? Like, I mean, we're hoping that it's for a lot of people, I think generally. The idea is that you can install, like you can have this understanding of linked art and CIDOC CRM and all these things, but you also don't need to. With the pieces loaded in there already, you have that GUI interface that really speaks to the side of the data creators. And then hopefully if you utilize the front end interface, it can speak to the users, but also there's that in between that covers the developers as well, because even when you're looking at a record in Arches, like if you're just looking at it in the default interface, you can still toggle into the JSON LD, and also can still take API input. So we have some developers at Getty who use Arches as either a system of record, so it's really like the whole package in one, or they use it as like this pass-through to get some data out of A space, and then it goes into Arches into this model. And then when you export it out of Arches, it's now in linked art in a way that can meet our linked open data layer that comes next. So there's some interesting ways to utilize both Arches and packages that come wrapped up in the installation. Okay, I think it's you now, George.
Right. So basically, with Ogee, we are trying to build something that is speaking to all these different communities and allows a programmer to understand what's going on, a conceptual modeler, the researcher. And so in order to do that, and this was like coming out of our project in Provenance, is like, how do you speak to these different communities? Like the Provenance specialist, how do you talk about the model in a way that speaks to them, which is not the JSON LD, which is not RDF, which is none of that. It's we have a provenance activity. It has a name. It has a time when it happened. It has a dealer that, transacted the information. So you need to meet a researcher on the level that they would understand, or the person building data, but you also have to talk to a developer in the place that they would understand, which, for example, would be the JSON LD. You might want to talk to the conceptual modeler who's building the data model with the CIDOC CRM and trying to apply linked art using the classes and properties names that are familiar to them from the standard that they're looking at. So what we did was we created a sort of documentation first approach to setting up how we were going to describe this system and then implement it. Oh yeah, right. I'm not controlling this. Can't click the buttons. Could you click on, yeah. So Yeah, I'll stay on this one. So what we did was we came up with a, driven also by how Arches works, we started thinking about describing the data or the data models in terms of fields, collections, and models. And so a field is a unit of information that you can describe to a person who's entering data or working with information, and it more or less is equivalent to something that they would see in an information interface. It's where you put in the birth date or the birthplace, and it has a semantic, an easily semantically interpretable meaning. It means this is where somebody was born, this is where somebody died, etc., etc. You can understand it in English or any other language you translate it to, but you can also define that as a CIDOC CRM path, a semantic path, and that can follow linked art principles. So how does linked art say we should do it? Well, it says we should follow it this way. So we follow the linked art pattern. We define that and match that up to what would be a field in the database. And that means that we can build a documentation that is described for one user as birthplace and for another user as a long semantic path, and for another user with a certain JSON LD formulation. But it's all linked in one line as a field. Those can be put together in what we call collections or branches. Arches calls it branches. And so that's typically where you document units of information together, like names go together with the type of name, go together with the source of the name. And so they're repeatable patterns that you're going to like roll out many times across different models, because all things that you document are going to have names. So you're going to use the same pattern for that. You don't have to document these things twice. You don't have to implement them twice. You just build them once and reuse them. And then we have the largest level of documentation and implementation, the model, which is a distinct entity in the world of documentation, such as people, physical objects. And again, in the case of Ogee, we're following the prescriptions of linked art because we want to just make that easy to apply for multiple different audiences. So we go on to the next slide, please. So what we've done is we've created a documentation system, which is called Zalige, and we'll probably pop into it for a second in a second. But basically where we've created a layer of documentation that is aimed at all four of those different user groups and creates a recipe for implementing linked art into Arches, and it's a one-to-one to the Arches implementation. It's also the case that you could use it for building any other systems. That's like part of the fair open dream as well, that for our purposes, it's very interesting and useful to use Arches because it's open source, because it has all these affordances which are interesting to bring users into making this data. But there's no reason you couldn't take the same patterns that are documenting and describing linked art and apply them in a completely different system, because that's what you need to use for your organizational purposes because of your knowledge or background, et cetera, et cetera. So we want to keep things open. We don't want to close things down. This is just a way to bring people into a linked open data world. So this actually, can I just take over screen sharing? Because I'd like to like poke into the documentation.
Go ahead.
Cheers. So just to give an idea here. So we have in this documentation a description of all the models that you can have for describing the cultural heritage world according to linked art. And you can look around for them. If there was lots of them, you could look for something by name and you'd say, okay, I want this activity one. And then when you load it up, it brings in shows you some metadata about what it's built with, when it was built, et cetera, et cetera. It has these features for describing it in a way that is interesting to an ontologist with all these nice little graphs that tell you about what nodes there are and what's happening in CIDOC CRM, and a turtle representation and a JSON representation. Oh, it's actually working. That's great. But then it has this other layer, which is a description of all the fields that are available in this model that are broken up by categories, and you can search through them. So I'm like, I want to document something in terms of an activity. Well, first of all, I can read what that's for. Then I can look in that model to look for, oh, can I describe names in this model? Yes, I can. There are these particular fields that have name information, and maybe I can read what they're to be used for and see if that's what I should use in my documentation activity. So that was the groundwork we set up for implementing the models. And then if we go over into Arches and look at the back end, we can see that this graph model that's set up using the designer is following those paths in the way that they're named. And then, so that has a name, which you can tell to the developer, I need to put something into the activity actor node without knowing anything about the semantics. But over here, we have the semantics, which is defined in the model or in the documentation, and it is set up here correctly. And then going over to name, for example. And then at the same time, you can set up the names for an end user in a way that's hopefully, so a researcher, a data manager who doesn't want to talk either in JSON LD terms or in conceptual modeling terms, et cetera, they want to have user-friendly fields that tell them what data to put in, where in the UI, and so then you have these sorts of options. So that's trying to cover the sort of whole gamut of the different audiences and bring them together. So let's see. So we've got documentation for each model, and the documentation is directly translated into Ogee Arches. So if you go to use Ogee Arches, you can always go and look at this documentation and find out a rich description of what each field is for and what each model is for, etc. Also, each model or each collection, each branch has a name and is documented and is reusable. And now I'm passing back to you, Alyssa, and I can do the stepping through the slides if you like.
Perfect. That sounds good. Thank you. So yeah, like after seeing all that, so the connection between linked art and how it looks once it's implemented in that Arches backend layer and a little bit of the front end layer, this is sort of a way to just see how the linked art modeling shakes out in Arches overall. It leads to 11 different models, 56 of those branches / collections, that sort of middle building block George was talking about in that IKEA diagram, and then over 650 plus different fields where there's content can be had, or there's pieces that are just connecting other pieces in the semantic like phrasing. So yeah, that's what it looks, that's what the package part looks like that we've built and then put inside the GitHub repo. So then when you install, it has all those models and branches and fields included. Next slide. And that's all to say that from this project comes a ton of coverage of the modeling and ways to learn about it. So we have that Zalige documentation, we have the ontology documentation for each of those pieces from CIDOC CRM. We have the different ways to look at it in the data entry part of Arches. We have the data model piece, the actual what it looks like when you just distill down to say a person or a digital object or an activity. And then in this table too, the slides are available through Sketch. You can also hit that link and it'll take you to a search of just underneath that particular model. So like if you were in Arches and you wanted to just look at places, that link will take you to that search directly. George, I don't know if you want to click into any of those or not, or if we should just offer that up as a thing for the community.
I think we can offer it up to the community afterwards.
Yeah. Okay. But so hopefully this like gives you kind of an understanding of everything alongside each other and sort of how they interplay. And then, yeah, we can go to the next slide. And if you load that Ogee package alongside your Arches installation, you'll get some sample data too. And we have 2 sets in there. One is dedicated to Frida Kahlo and her artworks. And basically every piece of the model is intended to be kind of touched using that set. So we tried to find something that fit in a textual work, something that fit into a place, all related to her. That was like our starting point. And then there's another set in there describing irises by Vincent van Gogh, because it's a big piece at the Getty. And that it has less data included in it because it's more of a representation of what we currently do with our museum collection. And it's kind of to show that you don't have to use every single piece of every single model. In some cases, you're paring it down just to be effective for whatever discovery system you're trying to get the data into. In other cases, you're really trying to be descriptive at a more complex level. So those 2 data sets kind of sit next to each other nicely and show 2 different ways to really use the database pieces. And we can go to the next slide. So yeah, the successes behind Ogee, I would say, is it provides multiple approaches to linked art modeling for different user groups. Because again, you'll have all of that modeling come with the package, but you can unpublish as much of it as you want. So if you're not really utilizing pieces of it, you can simplify it. And it also provides an implementation layer for linked art for researchers in particular, because it does have a data entry layer that's a little less semantic oriented, even though it's kind of a bridge between the 2, I'd say. It creates a starting off point for elaborating on and moving past linked art. It reduces complexity by showing it only when needed and implementing good decisions and good patterns. So I think that documentation and pattern system is kind of a key element to all of this. And when we were doing some of our bigger legacy projects, I think we got to this conclusion that coming from documentation first is really, really helpful, and also helps you in your sustainability of your data. And then additionally, it connects to an open source community for support. So there's a lot of technical experts, there's a lot of community groups that you can also rely a lot on the linked art community in general for some of those pieces. And then challenge-wise, generating awareness is obviously still a challenge across all of these things. Enabling quick implementation. I think there was a question in there about installation, and yeah, that is a tough part of this. Like actually having the technical expertise to do the arches part, the installation part, takes a more specified expertise. And then versioning alongside the linked art changes is also a challenge, because linked art is at version 1.0 now, and that will change as people make more decisions, as it gets more refined. And it's not that your modeling and your Arches system doesn't update automatically along with that. If you want to stay in sync with a certain version of linked art, you have to go in and manually make those changes or kind of redo the modeling pieces to meet that. Okay, I think we can move on.
Any desire to answer any questions, or any need to answer any questions before we move on?
Someone asked if it was open source, and yeah, yes, it's open source. And then I think someone asked about installation.
Okay.
Cool.
Right. So then to actually get to the system, or sort of show what we're trying to accomplish. So as we mentioned, in Ogee, we put in a sample data set which we just entered ourselves based on looking at open source data on Frida Kahlo. We're not experts in Frida Kahlo, but we just wanted to show how you'd enter data into the model. So for this demo, our idea was, all right, well, imagine that you were also inspired about Frida Kahlo and you wanted to add more information about her story into a linked open data world, and you had this information about Trotsky, who has a connection to Frida Kahlo through their uh, uh, relationship and their meeting in Mexico City when during his exile before his assassination. Um, so some typical information that you might want to put into the linked open data world. And so we wanted to look at how you would do that on different paths, depending on whether or not you had access to Ogee or if you were just trying to do it from scratch. So here's the data as an idea. And then if we think about setting the challenge to ourselves or a student or what have you, or a new employee of doing this with CIDOC CRM by itself, then sort of illustrate the challenge of actually doing that. So, all right, well, make this linked open data using CIDOC CRM. So one would find the website, one would look at it and take a deep breath, try to understand where things are, as we do with any website. Then eventually you would find out that, okay, the information you need is somewhere in resources. Then you'd have to look around, figure out, oh, there are many different versions of this ontology. There are many different ways it's been exported as a serialization. It's got a PDF, et cetera, et cetera. Then you might eventually land on the fact that the ontology is described in an online resource here, which is vaguely searchable. And you would think about Trotsky and think, what kind of person, what kind of thing is Trotsky? And you come to a nice conclusion like, oh, they're a person. Great, CIDOC CRM does allow me to say something about people. Okay, here's the information for the person class. Here's a description of what it's used for. That, in fact, if we read it, says comprises real persons who live or assume to have lived. That sounds like our person. There's other information which we'll ignore. Nelson Mandela was a person. Tutankhamun was a person. So is Trotsky. So that's great. I'm starting off well. But then the information I actually want to describe is uh, his name, his gender, his nationality, his birth date. And so if I go back to the CIDOC CRM website, I'll see that the only direct property off of person is has parent. That doesn't help me with the name. Maybe I see that there's this show all properties button, so I can say, oh, look, the ontology is rich. It has many properties. And I can start reading through this to try to understand where is the name. And actually, it's not very easy to find where is the name. So this is a bit of a reductio absurdum to show that for most situations, you don't want people directly trying to apply the ontology and make the decisions. It's going to be very time consuming, and you should already rely on some patterns that are out there. Searching through the website some more on CIDOC there are use and learn areas with graphical representations, which you could eventually find, and you'd find a way of applying the name information, hopefully. But it's obviously not very efficient, and people would get discouraged if that's how they were going to go through it. You also have to learn a bunch of things. You have to learn what a class is, what a property is, what the relations of sub and super classes, what super and sub properties are, all of which is very valuable and interesting. And depending on your place in the linked open data food chain might be very interesting to learn and apply. But if you're just trying to get data out into the world and compatible with linked art and with CIDOC CRM, this is the hardest way to go. So you could also just refer yourself to the linked art website. After all, that's where you want to get to. It's got a website. It's pretty easy to, there's less choices. So we can pretty quickly find out that, oh, here's the description of the model. Great. Then I can look around and then I can quickly eye up after a bit. There's an area, people and organizations, and this is going to start describing to me patterns that I want to follow for people and organizations. The first thing I land on is a nice piece of JSON LD. There are things that are familiar to me. Person, that sounds right. It also looks like the CIDOC CRM concept person I saw before. That's reinforcing. I see a label Rembrandt. Rembrandt is a person, so that's convincing. So I can start already thinking like, all right, maybe I'm going to produce a piece of JSON LD that looks like this, and I'm going to sub in Trotsky for Rembrandt. And then I can go on and I can find these patterns as we were talking about before with the IKEA shape. So the name pattern is classic, and then I'd say, all right, well, oh, look, here I've already been given more information that's faster to find than on the CIDOC CRM website. I have an example here that the person Rembrandt is identified by. That's the property I needed to start talking about names. By a name, great. That name is further classified as a primary name. That seems like a good idea to distinguish between different kinds of names. And then where do I put the actual name information? Here. In this case, it's Rembrandt, but in my case, it would be Trotsky or Trotsky's full original name. So that's good. But you definitely need to learn to read JSON LD. If you are used to looking at CIDOC CRM properties and classes, etc., then you need to learn the new way that LinkedArt has renamed those properties. So if you haven't learned those, you don't have to unlearn them. But if you have learned them, you do have to unlearn them. And then given that it's not an implementation, it's not trying to do it for you. You have to figure out a way how to make that JSON LD if you wanted to make a whole system. So that brings us to Ogee. So we've built the package, which, and at the end, will point you to all the resources so you can explore it yourself if you found it interesting. We built the package. We've also got a sample instance up right now, which I'm going to take you to now. But hopefully in the not too distant future, the Arches project itself is going to set up a sample website, responding to one of the earlier questions, that'll be refreshed on a regular basis. So it'll be a scratch website where people can go in and experiment with the models and add data, et cetera, et cetera. And then it'll be flushed every once in a while. So that'll be a way for people to get their eyes into Arches and into Ogee without having to do a bunch of installation before they decide to make the jump. So if we're on our demo here and we're trying to find a way to document Trotsky, then in Ogee Arches, we've actually got an implemented set of patterns. We've got 11 options here. We can immediately see there's a person button here. So if we click Create Resource, then we're presented with the data entry form, which is hiding all those semantics that were defined by LinkedArt, that were redocumented in Zalige, and which are now just presented here as English in this case, but they could be translated. Arches is a multilingual platform, and we can see that we can start looking for where we want to enter the data for this Trotsky individual. So let me just take this off full screen if possible, and go back here. Oh, that's the documentation. Oops. Let's see what I want to open. So I've just started a small Trotsky record here, which I've so far put in his name. And I'm not going to do too much data entry, as I'm sure you've all seen data entry before, but just to illustrate that it would then be quite easy to go ahead and accomplish my task of adding in some more information about Trotsky. And so I'll put in his name and that it's his full name. I thought I got that. Doesn't matter. So I can add connections to different entities, like he was a lover of Frida Kahlo. I can add in his birth information, such as he was born in Janovka. What's interesting is that Arches then connects these models up. So, for example, Yanovka is a place in Russia which doesn't exist in my system, but I can just jump into the place model, add the name Yanovka or add the entity Yanovka, and now I can return back and add the fact that he was born in Yanovka. I can add the time span of his birth event, which I will do manually 1879-10-11. And now, just to show you the sort of completion of that circle, if I now look at Trotsky in this related resource graph, then I can start building out his connections. I was going to enter a lot more things, but I realized as I started entering it that it would be not very exciting for everybody to watch me enter all that data. But you can see I can start building up the relationship to Yanovka. I can relate to the lovers of Frida node. And if I expand on that one, I can see that there were others. And we can move on from there to what's going on with Frida. And so we can really start building a rich semantic web that is applying linked art, which in turn is a principled application of CIDOC CRM. And this is opening that path for the researcher who doesn't have to understand anything about what's going on in the back end, but once they get excited about following these sorts of connections, can go and look at the documentation, find out how they're being made, and then possibly do much richer work in terms of afterwards, in terms of running complicated queries, of trying to find connections between people over time and places, et cetera, et cetera. So with that, I think I'll drive towards the end and leave open some time for any questions. So that's basically what we tried to do. We hope that it can be a sort of pathway for people to get into using linked art, either using it to make data or understand how it's applied. Oh yeah, sorry, there was one other thing I didn't show that was interesting about looking at Trotsky. So now also, just as proof of purchase, I just entered that few little pieces of information about Trotsky here. And if I go in Arches and change to a different view, it's now encoded all of that interesting and useful for developers information in JSON LD. So it's all perfectly formatted, semantic data following linked art, and we didn't have to know anything about that. And so we're really hoping that it could be something that was adopted by maybe smaller memory institutions to build some linked open data following good practices from linked art. You can imagine that if it's out there and people are using it, then we could try to make a pathway to eventually support data conservation through putting that kind of data into places like Wikidata or Europeana. The fact that large and important anchor institutions like the Getty and the Rijksmuseum and Yale and others are applying this standard means that there's like weight in the data sphere, hopefully, that makes it interesting to do the difficult and challenging data integration process. So you could imagine that, having a tool like Ogee, and there just doesn't have to be Ogee, but tools like that start to allow you to really think more strategically about how you can do data integration between large institutions, but also these smaller institutions, so that we really are getting past the data silos and finding out that I have interesting information about Frida Kahlo you didn't know about, and likewise, you have information that I didn't know about. And we can find that just via the data network. And then last but not least, hopefully it could be used in teaching contexts for applying semantic data. So a different way to understand how just by entering data via these forms, we can create JSON LD, we can figure out how to use an ontology properly, et cetera, et cetera. And so I think this has been shared, so you'll be able to find these links again. The So the Ogee itself is an Arches package, which is something that you install into Arches once you install the main platform. The link to the GitHub here is for the Arches package that we created. It's open source. We're looking after it. There's an issues section there. So if something's not working, please let us know in the issues section, and we'll try to make it go. That documentation that I was showing you is in a platform that we've built called Zellige. That's online and open and available to anybody, so you can take a look at the documentation for the Ogee project, and it also has documentation for many other projects. Then the instance that we were looking at today is hosted by one of our partners, Delving, and it's meant to be there for people to come and take a look at what it looks like. And then eventually, as I mentioned before, the Arches project itself is probably going to put up a public instance that people can go into the back end and play with. So stay tuned for that. There will be an announcement about it in the Arches forum when it happens, and we'll probably put a link to it on the GitHub as another way to get to that. And if you want to talk about this in any way, shape, or form, you can mail me via MailUs. You can mail Alyssa to talk about it as well. And I think that's a good place to stop and see if there's any questions before time's up. And thank you so much for your time and attention.
Yeah, thank you. Appreciate it. I do want to point out too that Bruno, who is currently an intern at the Getty, I believe at the Getty Research Institute, he came up with like a Dockerized version of installing Arches, which might be a little bit more of like a way to understand the installation process than just the way it's set up on the Arches site itself. So just something interesting to point out and maybe mess around with.
And Alyssa, that's a Dockerized version of Ogee Arches?
I think it's just Arches, actually.
Okay.
I'm not too sure. Yeah, I think well, actually, I don't know.
It's a shame
Last we talked
skipped
about it,
out
we
and
hadn't looked at it yet.
can't tell
Yeah.
us. There was a question further up in the chat that, if you don't mind, I will read.
Yeah, sure. Oh, sorry. I just
Um,
want to confirm it is Ogee Arches.
Okay.
It's Arches with linked
Okay.
art embedded into it. Okay, go ahead.
Wonderful. Have you heard, this is from Sarah Adams, have you heard of other projects / tools / etc. that operated through a quote unquote documentation first approach? Or was this an approach that you all just happened to come across organically?
I was going to point to you, George, because I feel like most of your projects are documentation first, but go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, the documentation first thing came organically out of working on multiple projects at the same time that were kind of trying to aim at the same goals, but were, always potentially going off in a different direction. And so when there were various things going on, but when linked art really started stabilizing some important and useful patterns for using CIDOC CRM, it just really made sense to take that and put that into a atomized documentation format so that you could keep you could solve the easy problems really quickly and say, oh yeah, your project has names and birth dates and blah, blah, blah. And that's documented by, it's got a solution from CIDOC here, from linked art. And we've named that as pattern XX. And we can just build that part of your data modeling problem up really quickly and say, that's fine. And then you can spend more time on the things that are, out there and new, really interesting information that hasn't been modeled before. And then, yeah, and so then in order to like not lose control of projects by having very many different documentation formats, we came up with that idea of like document first and then build the different elements of the semantic data process out of that. So now build, your ETL process out of the model that you've documented that you want to have as the target, and now build your Arches instance to mirror that as well. And so you're matching up the different elements, the different system elements that you need to set up in order to have a successful project.
There is a sort of healthy dialogue going on in the chat, but it seems like they're talking to one another, and these aren't questions for the speakers. So I think we've kind of run out of questions. If anybody has anything that they want to ask, please get it into the chat ASAP.
We said it at the beginning, Lily. No. Lily was asking why the name Ogee. Oh no, it's okay. And just as a reminder, it's this particular pattern in architecture, a pattern of a type of arch. I think someone earlier too was asking about Zalige.
Yeah, they're connected in as much as the Zalige is the Moroccan traditional technique of using geometric patterns and tiling to create beautiful tessellated designs. And that is something that I think reflects in the data patterns that we build in a project like Linked Art. And we're looking to build like these reusable patches of information that we can roll out continuously and see that part of the world. And Ogee uh, is an arch, and it's also, when tessellated, one of the basic Zalige patterns that you can make. So that's the reference.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And the ideal there is that like when we're making this link, the patterns all come together in the end, and hopefully if we had many Ogees, they would come together as well, or they'd bring the data together.
I just want to thank Mark and Jessica. Thanks for putting all the links in the chat, and I'm looking at the Affinity call group notes and they're amazing. So thank you for doing all the note taking as well. And Carly, of course. Thanks, Carly.
Yeah, and I'll just plug, you know, anyone who takes any of this work and runs with it, applies it for your own work, just always love to plug at the end of our calls an open invitation for follow-up calls or work in progress topics, discussions related to linked data for art and design for the LD4 Art and Design Affinity group. I continue to share links in the chat, but we do have a form where you can let us know if you'd like to present anything. And then, as I keep saying, we share our semi-monthly call announcements to our Google group, which you can request to join at that link in the chat. But yeah, thanks so much to Alyssa and George for joining our Affinity group session.
Thank you, Carly, for the opportunity.
Yeah, thank you.
All right. Thank you, everybody. This was a real pleasure. Thank you to everybody who attended. Thank you to the panelists. What a wonderful talk.